Okay. Easy so far. Oh no!
Hey there, welcome to the channel. My name's Faye, and when it comes to the Path of Exile series, I'm newer than I care to admit. I've only put like 30 minutes or an hour into the original Path of Exile, and so jumping into Path of Exile 2, it was a new experience. And because it was an experience that I ended up really enjoying and really loving, I wanted to make a video about it. This video is going to be split into two parts, spoiler free to begin with, and then I will give a disclaimer where it will turn into a completely spoiler summary of the first act and my thoughts on it. I hope you enjoy.
Nowhere to run.
Path of Exile 2 and what it offers outside of story can be split into roughly two categories. Those being classes and their different types of combat, followed by the different areas you explore, along with the enemies and bosses found within.
Out of mana. No mana. Storming arrow.
So far in early access, there are 6 classes the player can choose from. Sorceress, Warrior,
Feel my wrath.
Ranger, my personal favorite, Witch, Mercenary, and Monk. Now, even though these are the 6 classes you can choose from at the start of the game, these classes aren't linear. Path of Exile 2 allows the character you choose to equip any weapon, to learn any skill. And so the class you choose at the start of the game could purely be chosen based on their design and aesthetic. Then later on, you just change the main weapon and skills over time. The most important factor to keep in mind, though, is the passive skill tree. Basically, Path of Exile 2 has this huge passive skill tree that will most likely scare anyone who plays this game. The whole idea is that it's giving the player a lot of variety, and if you know what you're looking for, it's a lot simpler than if you're just seeing it for the first time. Now, all classes use the same passive skill tree. The difference is each class starts at a different location. So for example, if you start as Ranger, you start at the bottom right. Witch starts at the very top. So while you could start off as a Ranger and then go into Witch abilities, it's going to be a little tricky getting the right passive skill points. When it comes to the different environments and areas in Path of Exile 2, each act has a different theme. I'll not be touching Act 2 or 3 in this video, so for now, Act 1's area is rarely any light here. These are places where Rippers died, corruption has taken whatever it can get. As you explore the different areas, you may leave, then decide to come back at a later point to find the map's layout has changed. This is because the areas are randomly generated. Enemies fill almost every inch of these areas, with the type of enemies changing per area, and further into the game you get, the bigger the packs they come in. Along with the enemies, most areas in Path of Exile 2 have a set of mini-bosses sprinkled around, sometimes even a big boss. Bosses are usually dangerous due to the arena and unique patterns that they have, while mini-bosses are usually dangerous because they're surrounded by other enemies. Each area's boss comes with their own environments, be it a random snowy patch in the middle of a forest, or the underground chambers of a graveyard. Each boss feels like they belong here, and have an actual story as to who they are. It's perfect. Even the enemies sprinkled in each area feel like they belong where they are. Wolves in a forest, infected creatures in an overgrown infected forest. And while the numbers are exaggerated for gameplay, the types of enemies don't feel out of place. With well over a few dozen hours, I've not found myself getting bored of Path of Exile 2 so far. I'm excited to try the different classes. Even fighting old bosses still feel exciting. And because it's still in early access, I only see things improving from here on out. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Grinding Gear Games does next. Now, as a disclaimer, this is where the spoiler-free section will be ending. If you don't want to hear spoilers for Act 1, I recommend playing through and coming back afterwards.
Foul witch! Your very own coven cast you out for your forbidden pursuits. Your twisted necromancy ends here, at the end of a noose. Speak your last!
Your character selection screen is set to be your execution, dictated by the words of Count Grenor, the ruler of the surrounding area. Love that when you select your character, it seamlessly starts a cutscene, where that character is the single survivor of the hanging that occurs. It's such a small detail and probably really simple due to the state of current gaming, but it pleases me. The first area of the game, just like in Path of Exile 1, has you wash up on a shore, this time called the riverbank. There's basic enemies, including some that attack from range so as to catch you off guard. You don't open the menu and click skip tutorial, which by the way I think is a wonderful option, as it makes the starting area less annoying on new characters. The game teaches you how to equip your weapon, attach skills, actually important things. Unlike other games, where they act like moving around or using the camera is a bloody new thing. The boss of the riverbank is known as the Bloated Miller, although if you choose the warrior class, then your character would recognize the boss as someone named Brannock. The Miller is a boss designed around introducing you to the coming bosses, basic line attacks, summoning mobs, and while it might be trivial for most, I wouldn't be surprised if the odd person ended up getting overwhelmed, such as myself, since when I first played this game, this is where I died for the first time. I like the starting boss though, it's a good introduction to what to expect, but there's more to come. We find a home in the Clearfell encampment, meet some lovely NPCs who I find to be very interesting. Renly's lovely and must be protected. Lynn is definitely a character, but I love him all the same. And Una, with her place in the story, has a cool mysterious aura around her. She's not my favorite, that goes to Flynn and his cocky attitude, but she's well written. One of the first missions we get has us explore mud burrows, which takes us through Clearfell. Clearfell is a forest once used for gathering lumber, and is full of creepy vile hags summoning imps. There's an optional boss here you can miss if you're not careful though, Beira of the Rotten Pack. She's a bigger version of the vile hags, and focuses on ice magic. She fires icicles, scatters AoE that will freeze you if you're not careful, and reanimates undead wolves to gank you. Thankfully she's an early boss, and with the right gear isn't a problem. Mud Burrows is a stretch of connected tunnels filled with bug larvae and mud simulacrums. It also houses the Devourer boss, a giant worm thing whose body is so long it keeps tunneling up and below ground or underground, blocking off at most 4 large sections of the arena, along with constantly, and I mean constantly, summoning lava to annoy you, trying to poison you with its stinky spit. This boss is horrifying, disgusting to all hell. Really exciting experience though if you remember to keep yourself geared up. Also beyond Clearfell is the Grailwood. Its design is much like Clearfell with the exception that its trees are still standing. However, enemy-wise the wolves have gotten a bit more wary. Here we find someone named the Hooded One, hanging from a tree along with other hanging figures. You can tell they're not important because they're not as detailed though. Una sends you into the Red Vale to find a rune for freeing this Hooded One. Red Vale stands to its name. Red waters, red dirt, red corpses along the path I take, and red disgusting freaky abominations I don't ever want to see again. What the fuck are these things? Here you're tasked to clear out 3 obelisks. The first 2 summon loads of mobs, but the third summons the Rusted King. The Rusted King is a big brute, slow but able to hit you from a distance by telekinetically controlling his multiple swords. He also has a mob phase, which by now you should just expect from bosses. Other than that, he goes down pretty easily. I love his design and his attack animation's pretty, but other than that, he's just a story obstacle. After gathering the runes in Red Vale, Renly does a thing and you go plap, plap, plap in the tree roots. The hooded one is freed, but unconscious. So you take him to Clearfell encampment and are sent off to the Grim Tangle in search of a ring that can supposedly release the hooded one from his big sleepy time. The Grim Tangle connects through the Grellwood and is an underground maze of vines and tree roots and fungal infestations. In the Grim Tangle, you'll find Ervig, the Rotten Druid. He's the type of boss who stands still and teleports now and then, but mainly attacks using range and splashing area of effect attacks. Ervig's design is probably one of my favorites. I actually really like the Grim Tangle in general and its whole fungal infection setting. I want to add, when it comes to Ervig, and when I fought him on my Ranger, this was when I found out that Snipe was overpowered. You see, every skill you have can get a support gem, which enhances its ability, enhances how it works. Snipe can get the skill gem, a support gem, Window of Opportunity. Basically what this means is if you get a critical hit, it increases the damage that critical hit does. And the way Snipe works is that if you charge your attack and release it exactly the moment the charge completes, you are guaranteed a critical hit. With this in mind, I killed Ervig in 3 hits. Fucking amazing. Through the Grim Tangle, you come to the Cemetery of the Eternals. I always loved graveyards in game. Dark Souls is a big reason for this, as I'm the type of player who, when I replay Dark Souls Remastered, I'll just go straight to the catacombs, like immediately. Trust me when I say that those darn skeletons will do anything in their power to stop you. Ugh. From here we have 2 pathways, both leading into underground crypts. One of the choices is Tomb of the Consort. Inside, remains of coffins fills the walls, and skeletons and necromancers litter the holes. The boss is Asinia, the Praetor's consort. He reminds me of Murgo's wet nurse from Bloodborne. It's also this boss that made me realize some of the bosses are built around the class you can choose from. Asinia specifically seems to be based on the witch class. I found that to be really awesome. The other area you can go to is called Mausoleum of the Praetor, a much more well-kept place, which makes sense since it's a mausoleum. It has a very similar enemy set to the Tomb of the Consort, with the addition to these creepy courtesans, usually being followed by the demonic spawn. The boss of the mausoleum, Draven the Eternal Praetor, is similar to Ervig, sort of. He rarely moves around unless it's quickly from point A to point B. When it comes to Asinia and Draven though, the wonderful mechanic I love is that when you're fighting one of them, the spirit of the other will periodically appear and use their own attacks. So when you're fighting Asinia, the ghost of Draven will show up. And when you're fighting Draven, the ghost of Asinia will sometimes show up and do their own attacks. It's brilliant. Especially since lore-wise, these two are very close.
Servants, obey.
Now with both the tomb and mausoleum down, we can enter the memorial gate. You may have noticed upon entering Cemetery of the Eternals that there's this older, deranged man named Lachlann outside the memorial gate. He's been wondering where his family is, and believes them to be just past this gate. Upon opening said gate, he runs inside, only to find graves of his family members. And in his emotional state, and because of the corruption, he ends up transforming into a monstrosity.
What is this? Graves, Isabel, Torquil, Callum, the family of Count Lachlann of Ogham. My family! This doesn't make any sense. They're dead. Those bastard Eternals! I must make them pay!
This moment is probably my favorite in Act 1. We have this very depressed, lonely, scared man who's been through a lot and just wants to know where his family is. He's forced to realize they've been dead this whole time, and it sends him into madness. Then, thanks to the corruption flooding the land, he turns into an abomination. His transformation is akin to that of Father Gascoigne from, yet again, Bloodborne. Lachlann the Lost as a boss was the first challenge I found in Path of Exile 2. He freezes the area with line attacks, uses spirits to hit you, one of which is surprisingly difficult to dodge sometimes, and then he has 2 melee attacks. He's a bit of a slow boss, giving you time to get distance and collect yourself, but whenever he casts spirits at you, they freeze the ground, and they slow you down if you walk on them, and do constant damage.
I knew something wasn't right with him. I suppose this was a mercy.
Once defeated, he drops the ring, and he can return to Clearfell encampment. The Hooded One awakens. Some exposition is given regarding a seed of corruption the Hooded One had kept and that Count Grenor knew about and stole. We're now tasked with going to Ogham village. Something I'll briefly talk on is that this story is delivered in quick snippets, short dialogue pieces when you talk to NPCs before throwing you into quests and areas. So usually you'll experience story-related dialogue, then go back to 20 or 30 minutes adventuring, doing whatever you need to. This type of storytelling is wonderful for the type of game Path of Exile paints itself as. It doesn't overwhelm the player with too much dialogue, other games like Final Fantasy might, but it also doesn't leave everything up to interpretation like games like Dark Souls. It gives its exposition, it leads you down your path, and the rest of the story can be discovered via boss names, scattered lore, and other ways. You choose what you read and experience. You choose what you learn. And it means replays of the game aren't tedious or boring, because the dialogue can be skipped with just a few clicks. So we move on to the hunting grounds. Corrupted burbs and some spinnerack looking things live here, along with goddamn King fucking Kong's lost cousin. The boss of the hunting grounds is the Crowbell, a very interesting boss to say the least. You start the fight where it's standing atop of a pillar surrounded by broken rubble. Once you bring it down by around 1/6 of its health, the Crowbell runs away, and if you follow, you become locked in a small area between 2 doors. It's a tight quarters fight until the Crowbell reaches around half health. Once that happens, it shrinks down a little bit. Being unable to fight you in its new form, it finds a weapon. It rams out of the locked door and you chase it to a crater surrounded by sharp thorns. The Crowbell is kind of a 3-phase fight. The first phase introduces you to the boss in an open area. Then the second phase locks you into a much smaller arena, forcing you to be much more careful. And then the final phase, changing the boss's attack patterns. The boss fight and how it changes along with the Crowbell's design makes it a very fun and interesting experience. Chasing it around gives me the sense this creature is either afraid or merely fighting in self-defense. Which makes sense, we seeked it out.
Not screaming anymore, are you?
There is a side quest in the hunting grounds where you find an altar. Interacting with it will summon enemies, and clearing them will summon Flynn, who gives information on an enclave that may be up to some shit. The enclave is in a place called Freythorne, one of the most interestingly designed areas, but it's also bloody frustrating. The tight pathways and the amount of enemies that tend to pack together. The whole layout is a bunch of platforms, bridges, and pathways made from wood. There is a very little space to fight, so you're dodging constantly to get some distance. And it's very easy to get accidentally cornered by the large groups of enemies if you're not careful. If you manage to survive getting through the cultists, you'll find that there are 3 altars. Technically 4, but we'll leave the last one for later. Again, interacting with them involves being ganked by enemies. You're sealed into an arena. Remember when I said the areas in the Enclave leave very little space to fight? Well, at least then you had the option to just keep dodging backwards, leading the enemies back the way you came, as you slowly take them down. Here, you don't have that luxury. If, however, you manage to complete all 3 altars, a 4th that you may have found to be surrounded by swirling darkness will become available. Also, upon clearing the altar's challenges, you may have heard dialogue from someone named the King in the Mists, who tells you to be gone. I'm good, thanks. The 4th ritual starts the same as the others. Loads of mobs. But at least the arena is larger. Upon clearing them, the king appears. He has a very cool design, and as he comes close to death, he becomes untargetable, followed by transforming into a genuine second phase, unlike the previous Crowbell. In his second phase, his health reverts, and he can actually root you to the ground, immobilizing you for 5 bloody seconds. This is the worst part of the fight. The literal worst in my opinion. Not because it's shit, but because the last time I did this fight with my ranger, and I went to use my skill snipe, I killed him. But because snipe requires me to stand still for a while, I got hit by the immobilizing attack, and it killed me. So the boss died, I died, he dropped loot, I respawned, and the loot got deleted because I respawned. I didn't record that part, I'm so sorry. But fuck's sake, that pissed me off.
Whatever this was, it's not over. This dark power will return. Someday.
Back to the main story, Ogham Farmlands. This was probably once a lovely place. It was actually the home to Renly and Una, but the corruption has led it to destruction. There are no bosses here, but Una does ask you to find her loot, which can be found in a random hut. As a reward, she offers to write up a song about you. How thoughtful. Oh, and she gives you 2 extra passive points as well. It's cool too, I guess. Ogham Village is just beyond. It's pretty lit, honestly. Pigs can randomly run out of the burning buildings and explode on top of you, while most of the villages are purely on fire and attack you on sight. You'll be tearing through them quite a lot, but what, or specifically who, awaits at the end will make your venture much worth it. You see, back during character selection, there was this tall man behind you. His role, when you finally picked who you were going to play, was pulling the lever, resulting in you almost being hung. And, well, successfully hanging the other 5 possible characters. His title is the Executioner, and he is here in Ogham.
Don't do this. Stop. Just wait. Surely we can...
Path of peace is littered with death. Justice no fight.
You bastard!
Ogham deserves one last execution.
With a really dramatic opening, he jumps down and so ensues the best boss fight so far. The environment around you makes this fight a lot better. The Executioner is also just a cool boss aesthetically. He's a brute in the literal term, armored to all hell and carrying the biggest axe I think I've ever seen. His voice is dark and threatening, enough to easily give me shivers. As for combat, there's a huge line cleave, a swing dealing AoE damage around him, and dropping a fucking guillotine on your head. Thankfully, that last one has the longest telegraph, making it very easy to dodge, but it also deals the most damage. His mob phase is consistent, enemies constantly coming from the upper alleys, along with other mobs that send fire arrows from a location you can't reach. I have a little theory that the mobs only really spawn if you're on the upper half of the arena, and if you stick to the bottom half, you're fine, you just have to deal with the boss. But because of how the boss fights, you're sort of forced to run around a lot, so yeah. The whole battle is a clusterfuck though. It truly speaks, you're entering the real game now.
Mere strength is no match for skill.
With the Executioner down, Latus, the girl forced to watch her husband be beheaded earlier, can be freed. And upon talking to her back at Clearfell encampment, we're given more reason to enter the Count's manor and kill the bastard. Next is the Manor ramparts, a beautiful place reminiscent of the Victorian era. An era I find quite lovely from a glance, but would never hope to live in because I hate wearing hats. Here you'll discover plenty of mercenaries in packs, groups of mutated creeps, and living gargoyle statues ready to beat you into the ground. This is where the game has a huge difficulty spike, at least it did for me. Make sure your skills are upgraded. The highest you can go is level 5 at the moment, but level 4 works and is easier to obtain. Also, make sure to keep upgrading your gear. You can find the gallows here in the Manor ramparts, but other than that, the only option other than fighting enemies is moving into the Manor itself, where the final area of Act 1 waits.
The walls carry a subtle beat of a monstrous heart.
Ogham Manor is beautiful. Simply beautiful. It's still littered with blood carriers and the like, and they're even more dangerous in the manor because of the tight hallways, but that's its own thing. Exploring the manor, you'll come to a huge hall that lets you peek into a much lower floor that the Count appears to be in with his Countess, ordering workers to mine. There's also a weird tentacle thing in the cage, which you later find out is the Seed of Corruption. Just past this is an optional boss, Candlemass, the Living Right. At first a living statue, it comes to life after you read its plaque. It's a simple fight with only like 3 attacks that aren't too difficult to avoid. His look is pretty neat as well, but the fight, it just isn't as fun as the other bosses in my opinion. Continuing through the manor, down some stairs, and then through some more holes in the floor, down some more stairs, and through a lot more enemies, we stop at the final checkpoint, and we're able to take a lift down into what is called the arena. Your first objective, clear out the enemy workers. Once that happens, the Countess convinces Count Grenor to kill us. The Count, being the simp he is, jumps in saying,
No noose this time. I'll remove your head myself.
We'll see about that.
a sword in hand and mostly using ice, the Count will often dash at you or choose to sweep the arena, covering half in a light amount of frost. Once some time has passed, he'll transform into that of a black wolf. The fuck does he think he is? A Link from Twilight Princess? I mean, I'm not complaining. That's fucking awesome. In his wolf form, he jumps into the air then crashes down onto your location. At first I thought this attack was just hard to dodge, but I've since been told the telegraph is him staring directly at you and getting ready to jump. Even with this in mind, I've still found it pretty hard to dodge. As his health drops, he begins begging the Countess, Oriana, for help.
Oriana! Open the cage! Release the beast! Give me what you promised!
I think it's wrong. I think you don't know. Since you are too weak to do the job, I'll find someone who can. Goodbye, husband.
Manipulative whore! How dare you abandon me after all I've given you!
Grenor decides to transform one last time into a corrupted version of his wolf form. His health resets. What a bitch! But his new form looks fantastic. He takes his sword onto his back. Okay, he's just trying to cosplay Wolf Link at this point, and his two phases combine together into an even scarier fight. In no particular order, he'll still slam down on top of you, he'll call icicles down into the arena, and if you don't find the safe spot all 4 consecutive times, you'll take ice damage, and depending on your ice resistance, possibly get frozen and then die. Lastly, his mob phase. He fills the arena and proceeds to hide in a misty fog, leaving the center of the arena safe. Staying in the fog too long damages you, forcing you to be in the middle. Mobs will begin spawning. Grenor will give spooky monologues, and at the end of each sentence, dash through the middle from a random location. I found the best way to avoid this is dodge roughly a second after each sentence ends, although the mobs make this easier said than done. This fight is beyond amazing, possibly tied with the Executioner in my opinion. The only downside is the difficulty jump compared to even the Executioner, but specifically bosses before the Executioner. The damage dealt is much higher, and the speed of the fight as well as the length it goes on for are greatly increased. This might just be something I need to get used to, but I thought I'd mention it.
I smell your blood, and I am ravenous. Allow me to clear your mind, if only for a moment. The madness, it consumed my being. Oriana used it against me. Where has she taken the beast? I found messages from the desert. From the Vastiri? Yes. Find her. Kill her. But first, please, stop the madness. As you wish.
In conclusion, Path of Exile 2 has definitely ended 2024 on a really high note for me. It makes 2025 very exciting in seeing where it goes. I've enjoyed Act 2 a lot so far, although I won't get into spoilers for it. After all, this video is pretty long. And Act 3 was just bloody amazing on its own. The freedom of playing other classes without feeling restricted by replaying the story each time feels amazing. And the bosses have all been exciting. Learning their patterns and rhythmically feeling them out gives me the same enjoyment as bosses such as from the numerous FromSoft titles. If you've stayed and watched to this point, thank you. I wanted to dig deep into what Grinding Gear Games has created in hopes he gets the game more attention. They deserve it. So if you can afford the early access, I'd highly recommend checking this game out, if the gameplay stands out to you, that is. Otherwise, perhaps check it out when it releases in a few months, as the developers have already stated it'll become free to play. With that, it's time to sign off. Enjoy your day. Thanks for watching.